Have you ever wondered why some people seem to walk through life effortlessly commanding respect, while others constantly find themselves being taken advantage of, manipulated, or overlooked? The answer isn't about being mean or ruthless. It's about understanding three invisible patterns that signal to others whether you're someone to respect or someone to use. Psychology tells us that within the first few seconds of meeting you, people unconsciously categorize you. They decide whether you're confident or insecure, whether you have boundaries or you're easily pushed around, whether you're someone they need to impress or someone they can control. And this decision happens so fast that you don't even realize it's being made. But here's what most people don't understand. The very qualities you think make you a good person, your kindness, your willingness to help, your desire to keep the peace, can actually be the exact things that make others see you as weak. Not because these qualities are bad, but because of how you express them. When kindness comes from insecurity instead of strength, when helping comes from fear instead of choice, when peacekeeping comes from avoidance instead of wisdom, that's when you become a target. The uncomfortable truth is that there are people in this world who will test your boundaries, push your limits, and see how much they can get away with. They're not necessarily evil people. They're just human beings following their natural instincts. And if you send signals that you won't stand up for yourself, that you're afraid of conflict, that you need their approval to feel okay about yourself, they will unconsciously start treating you accordingly. Today, we're going to explore the three hidden weaknesses that make you an easy target for manipulation, control, and disrespect. More importantly, we're going to talk about how to transform these weaknesses into sources of quiet, unshakable strength. Let's start with something almost everyone struggles with: the overwhelming need to be understood. You know that feeling when someone misunderstands your intentions, and you feel this urgent need to explain yourself? When someone judges you unfairly, and you can't rest until you've convinced them they're wrong. When you find yourself over-explaining every decision, every boundary, every choice you make. This need to be understood feels so natural, so reasonable. After all, don't we all want to be seen for who we really are? Don't we all deserve to have our side of the story heard? The answer is yes, but here's the trap. The more desperately you need to be understood, the more power you give others over your emotional state. Think about it this way. When you constantly explain yourself, you're essentially saying, "My worth depends on your approval of my choices." You're putting your sense of self up for debate. You're asking permission to be who you are. And unconsciously, this sends a message to others that you're not confident in your own decisions, that you need external validation to feel secure. People who manipulate others have a sixth sense for this kind of insecurity. They can spot someone who needs to be understood from a mile away. And once they identify this need, they have a powerful tool to control you. All they have to do is withhold their understanding, act confused about your motivations, or make you feel misunderstood, and suddenly you're bending over backward trying to win them back. Sarah learned this lesson the hard way. She was the kind of person who would write long text messages explaining why she couldn't attend a last-minute invitation, detailing her schedule and apologizing profusely. When a coworker made a snide comment about her work, she would spend hours crafting the perfect response to clear up any misunderstanding. When her friends seemed upset, she would analyze every conversation they'd had, trying to figure out what she'd done wrong and how to fix it. What Sarah didn't realize was that her constant explanations were actually making people respect her less, not more. Her coworkers started seeing her as someone who could be guilt-tripped into working late. After all, if she felt the need to justify saying no, maybe she didn't really mean it. Her friends began to see her as exhausting, someone who turned every small interaction into a therapy session. The transformation happened when Sarah learned to let misunderstandings exist without rushing to fix them. When someone made an assumption about her motives, instead of launching into a detailed explanation, she would simply say, "That's not accurate," and leave it at that. When someone seemed upset with her, Instead of chasing after them with apologies and explanations, she would give them space to process their feelings. At first, this felt terrifying. Sarah was convinced that people would think the worst of her if she didn't constantly clarify her intentions. But something interesting happened instead. People started coming to her for advice, seeking out her opinion, treating her with more respect. But because she had stopped acting like her worth was up for debate. The truth is, the most powerful people you know don't explain themselves constantly. They make decisions and stand by them. They let others think what they want to think. They understand that trying to control other people's perceptions is exhausting and ultimately impossible. Instead, they focus on being consistent in their actions and letting their character speak for itself over time. This doesn't mean you should never explain yourself or that you should be cold and uncommunicative. It means you should be selective about when and to whom you offer explanations. Save your energy for the people who truly matter to you and who have earned the right to understand your inner world. For everyone else, let your actions be explanation enough. The second weakness that makes you easy to control is perhaps even more universal than the first: the absolute terror of being disliked. This fear runs so deep in most people that they don't even realize how much it controls their behavior. They'll say yes when they want to say no, smile when they want to frown, apologize when they've done nothing wrong, and shrink themselves down to make others comfortable. This fear usually starts in childhood. You were taught to be nice, to be polite, to not make waves. You learned that being liked meant being safe, and being disliked meant being in danger. These were important lessons when you were small and dependent on others for survival. But as an adult, this same fear can become a prison that keeps you trapped in relationships and situations that don't serve you. The problem with being terrified of being disliked is that it makes you incredibly easy to manipulate. When someone knows that you'll do almost anything to avoid their disapproval, they hold all the cards. They can guilt you, shame you, emotionally blackmail you, and you'll comply because the alternative, being seen as selfish, mean, or difficult, feels worse than whatever they're asking you to do. Marcus used to be the guy who said yes to everything. When his boss asked him to work overtime for the third weekend in a row, Marcus agreed because he didn't want to be seen as uncommitted. When his friend asked to borrow money for the fifth time without paying back the previous loans, Marcus handed it over because he didn't want to seem selfish. When his mother guilt-tripped him about not visiting enough, Marcus would cancel his own plans to drive across town, even though he'd already visited twice that week. Marcus thought he was being a good person. He thought his willingness to sacrifice for others was a sign of his character. But what he didn't realize was that his fear of being disliked was actually causing people to respect him less, not more. His boss saw him as someone who could be taken advantage of. His friends saw him as a convenient ATM. His mother saw him as someone whose boundaries didn't really matter. The shift happened when Marcus realized that trying to be liked by everyone was not only impossible, it was also making him miserable. He started practicing saying no without over-explaining why. When his boss asked him to work another weekend, Marcus simply said, "I won't be available this weekend." When his friend asked for money, Marcus said, "I'm not comfortable lending money right now." When his mother guilt-tripped him, Marcus said, "I understand you'd like to see me more, but this is what works for my schedule." At first, these people pushed back. They tried to make Marcus feel guilty, selfish, uncaring. But Marcus had learned something crucial. Their discomfort with his boundaries was not his responsibility to fix. He could be kind and respectful while still maintaining his limits. And gradually, something shifted. His boss started respecting his time more. His friends stopped seeing him as an easy target for loans. His mother began appreciating his visits more because she knew they were freely given, not guilt-induced. The most powerful realization Marcus had was this: the people who truly cared about him wanted him to have boundaries. They wanted him to take care of himself. They wanted him to be honest about his limits. The only people who had a problem with his boundaries were the people who had been benefiting from his lack of them. This is the paradox of likability. The more desperately you need to be liked, the less likable you become. When you're constantly shape-shifting to please others, you lose the very authenticity that makes genuine connection possible. People can sense when someone is performing likability rather than simply being themselves, and it creates an unconscious feeling of unease. The most genuinely likable people you know aren't trying to be liked by everyone. They have clear values, firm boundaries, and the courage to be disliked by some people in order to be authentic with all people. They understand that universal likability is not only impossible, it's also not worth pursuing. The third and perhaps most dangerous weakness is what we might call the addiction to peace. This is the belief that harmony should be maintained at all costs, that conflict is always bad, that your job in life is to keep everyone comfortable and happy. People with this addiction will tolerate disrespect, swallow their feelings, and sacrifice their own needs to avoid any kind of tension or confrontation. On the surface, this seems like a noble quality. Who doesn't want peace? Who wouldn't prefer a life without conflict or drama? But here's the problem: real peace, the kind that's sustainable and healthy, can only exist when it's built on a foundation of mutual respect. And mutual respect can only exist when people know there are consequences for crossing your boundaries. When you're addicted to peace, you're essentially teaching people that they can treat you however they want because you'll never push back. You'll absorb their bad moods, tolerate their disrespect, and smooth over their mistakes because confronting them would be uncomfortable. But what you're really doing is enabling bad behavior and ensuring that it continues. Jessica was a classic peace addict. At work, when her colleague would interrupt her during meetings or take credit for her ideas, Jessica would smile and let it slide because she didn't want to cause drama. When her roommate would leave dishes in the sink for days or bring loud friends over on weeknights, Jessica would clean up after her and suffer in silence because she didn't want to be difficult. When her boyfriend would cancel plans at the last minute or show up late without apology, Jessica would act understanding and accommodating because she didn't want to start a fight. Jessica thought she was being mature, evolved, spiritual even. She thought her ability to rise above conflict made her better than people who got caught up in drama. But what she didn't realize was that her addiction to peace was actually creating more problems, not fewer. Her colleagues' behavior got worse over time. Her roommate became increasingly inconsiderate. Her boyfriend started taking her for granted more and more. The turning point came when Jessica realized that her avoidance of small conflicts was actually creating much bigger problems down the road. All the resentment she'd been swallowing, all the disrespect she'd been tolerating, all the boundaries she'd been letting slide, it was all building up inside her like pressure in a volcano. She was either going to explode in anger or implode in depression, neither of which was peaceful at all. Constantly, not just through your words, but through your body language, your tone of voice, your response time, and dozens of other subtle signals that communicate whether you're someone to respect or someone to manipulate. Let's start with the body language of someone desperate to be understood. This person is constantly leaking anxiety through their physical presentation. They smile too much, especially when they're nervous or when there's tension in the room. They nod excessively when others are speaking as if to say, "Yes, I understand, please like me." They fidget with their hands, touch their face, or shift their weight frequently. Their voice tends to be soft, their tone apologetic, and they often end statements with an upward inflection that makes everything sound like a question. All of these behaviors are unconscious attempts to appear non-threatening and likable, but they actually communicate insecurity and a desperate need for approval. When you're constantly signaling that you need others to feel comfortable around you, you're also signaling that you don't feel comfortable with yourself. The body language of someone terrified of being disliked is similar but has its own specific markers. This person rushes to fill uncomfortable silences, laughs at jokes that aren't funny, especially if those jokes are at their expense, and constantly checks the facial expressions of others to gauge their approval. They tend to make themselves physically smaller, hunched shoulders, crossed arms, taking up less space than they deserve. When they speak, they often preface their opinions with phrases like, "I might be wrong, but," or "This is probably stupid, but," or "I don't know if this makes sense, but." These verbal and physical patterns all communicate the same message. Please don't be upset with me. I'm not a threat. I'm safe to dismiss or ignore. And unfortunately, many people will unconsciously take them up on that offer. The body language of someone addicted to peace is perhaps the most subtle but also the most dangerous. This person has perfected the art of appearing calm and collected even when they're screaming inside. They smile when they're angry, they nod when they disagree, and they say, "It's fine," when it's clearly not fine. They've learned to suppress their natural emotional responses so thoroughly that they sometimes don't even know what they're really feeling anymore. This might seem like emotional maturity, but it's actually a form of self-abandonment. When you consistently override your natural emotional responses to avoid conflict, you're teaching yourself that your feelings don't matter. You're also teaching others that they don't need to consider your feelings because you clearly don't consider them yourself. So how do you transform these weaknesses into strengths? How do you go from being someone who's easily manipulated to someone who commands natural respect? The answer lies in developing what we might call strategic self-possession, the ability to remain centered and grounded regardless of what others are doing or saying around you. Let's start with overcoming the need to be understood. The key here is to develop what psychologists call internal validation, the ability to know your own worth without needing others to confirm it. This means learning to trust your own judgment, to feel confident in your decisions even when others don't understand them, and to be okay with being misunderstood by people who don't know you well. Practically, this means stopping the habit of over-explanation. When someone questions your decision, instead of launching into a detailed justification, try responding with simple statements like, "That works for me," or "I'm comfortable with my choice," or "I've thought it through." Let them sit with their confusion instead of rushing to resolve it for them. It also means learning to delay your responses. When someone sends you a text or email that triggers your need to explain yourself, don't respond immediately. Sit with the discomfort of being potentially misunderstood. Often, you'll find that the urge to over-explain fades, and you can respond with something much more confident and concise. Overcoming the fear of being disliked requires building what we might call disapproval tolerance. This is the ability to be disliked by some people without losing your sense of self-worth. Start small. Practice saying no to low-stakes requests without elaborate explanations. Practice expressing opinions that you know might be unpopular. Practice walking away from conversations where you're being disrespected, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Remember, the goal isn't to be unlikable, it's to be authentic. Most people will actually like you more when you're being genuine, even if your genuine self is sometimes challenging or difficult. The only people who will like you less are the people who are benefiting from your people-pleasing behavior, and their disapproval is actually a sign that you're moving in the right direction. Overcoming the addiction to peace requires developing what we might call conflict competence, the ability to navigate disagreement and tension without losing your center. This doesn't mean becoming argumentative or aggressive, it means becoming comfortable with the fact that not everyone will be happy with you all the time, and that's okay. Start by addressing small issues before they become big ones. Practice having direct conversations about your needs and boundaries. Learn to sit with the temporary discomfort that comes after you've had a difficult conversation, knowing that this momentary tension is often followed by deeper respect and better relationship dynamics. One of the most powerful tools you can develop in this transformation is the strategic use of silence. Most people are deeply uncomfortable with silence and will rush to fill it, often revealing more about themselves than they intended. When you learn to be comfortable with silence, you gain a significant advantage in any interaction. When someone says something disrespectful to you, instead of immediately defending yourself or fighting back, try simply staring at them silently for a few seconds. Let them sit with the weight of what they've just said. Often, they'll start backtracking or explaining themselves without you having to say a word. When someone tries to pressure you into a decision, instead of immediately saying yes or launching into explanations about why you can't, try saying, "Let me think about that," and then actually taking time to think. This simple phrase accomplishes several things. It shows that you don't make decisions based on pressure, it gives you time to consider what you actually want, and it forces the other person to wait for your answer rather than assuming they can steamroll you into compliance. When someone asks you a personal question that you don't want to answer, instead of fumbling for a polite deflection, try simply saying, "I prefer not to discuss that," and then changing the subject or remaining silent. Most people will respect this boundary, and those who don't will reveal themselves as people you probably don't want in your inner circle anyway. Here's something that might surprise you. The less you need respect from others, the more respect you'll actually receive. This is one of the great paradoxes of human psychology. When you're desperately seeking respect, you engage in behaviors that actually diminish respect, over-explaining, people-pleasing, avoiding conflict. But when you stop needing others' respect and start respecting yourself, others naturally begin to respect you too. This doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen with everyone. Some people in your life have become accustomed to treating you a certain way, and they may resist when you start setting boundaries or refusing to engage in old patterns. This resistance is actually a good sign. It means your changes are working. The people who truly care about you will adjust to your new boundaries and often express appreciation for your increased authenticity. The people who can't or won't adjust will reveal themselves as people who were more interested in what they could get from you than in who you actually are. Remember, changing these patterns isn't about becoming cold, mean, or uncaring. It's about becoming genuinely strong rather than just appearing nice. It's about developing the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. It's about becoming someone who can be kind from a place of choice rather than fear, who can be generous from a place of abundance rather than need, and who can be peaceful from a place of strength rather than avoidance. Transforming these deep-seated patterns requires daily practice. Like building physical strength, building psychological strength happens through consistent, small actions over time. Here are some practical ways to start developing unshakable self-possession. Practice the pause. Before responding to any request, question, or criticism, take a breath. Count to 3. Ask yourself what you actually think or want, rather than what you think the other person wants to hear. This simple pause can save you from countless moments of saying yes when you mean no or explaining yourself when no explanation is needed. Practice selective disclosure. You don't owe everyone access to your thoughts, feelings, plans, or personal information. Start being more intentional about what you share and with whom. Save your vulnerable truths for people who have earned the right to hear them through demonstrated care and trustworthiness. Practice strategic unavailability. You don't have to be instantly accessible to everyone all the time. Let some phone calls go to voicemail. Wait a few hours before responding to non-urgent texts. Take time before making decisions, especially when others are pressuring you for immediate answers. Practice disappointment tolerance. Start saying no to requests that don't align with your priorities, even when you know it might disappoint others. Start expressing opinions that might be unpopular. Start walking away from conversations or situations that don't feel good to you, even when others want you to stay. The goal of all these practices is to develop a deep, unshakable sense of your own worth that doesn't depend on others' opinions, approval, or validation. When you have this internal foundation, you become much harder to manipulate, control, or disrespect because you're no longer seeking from others what you can only give to yourself. As you begin to embody these changes, you'll notice something interesting happening in your relationships and interactions. The people who were used to taking advantage of your weaknesses may initially push back or try to guilt you back into old patterns. This is normal and expected. It's their unconscious way of testing whether your changes are real or just temporary. Stay consistent during this testing phase. Don't explain or justify your new boundaries. Don't apologize for taking care of yourself. Don't try to convince anyone that your changes are reasonable or necessary. Simply maintain your new patterns and let your actions speak for themselves. Over time, you'll notice that some relationships naturally fall away. Usually the ones that were based more on what you could provide than on genuine mutual care and respect. This can be painful, but it's also liberating. You're making room in your life for relationships that actually nurture and sustain you rather than drain and diminish you. You'll also notice that new people are drawn to you, people who are attracted to your authenticity and strength rather than your accommodation and availability. These tend to be higher quality relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. Most importantly, you'll notice a shift in how you feel about yourself. When you stop betraying yourself to please others, when you stop abandoning your own needs to meet everyone else's, when you stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable, you begin to experience a deep sense of self-respect and inner peace that no external validation could ever provide. This is true power, not the power to control or manipulate others, but the power to remain centered and grounded no matter what storms are raging around you. This is the kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself, the kind of confidence that doesn't need to prove itself, the kind of presence that commands respect simply by existing. The journey from weakness to strength, from manipulation target to unshakable presence, is not always easy or comfortable. It requires you to face some uncomfortable truths about yourself and others. It requires you to risk disappointing people who have become accustomed to your accommodation. It requires you to trust that you're worthy of respect even when others try to convince you otherwise. But the alternative, continuing to live as someone who can be easily controlled, manipulated, and disrespected, is far more painful than the temporary discomfort of setting boundaries and claiming your power. You deserve relationships where you're valued for who you are, not just for what you provide. You deserve to move through the world with confidence and self-respect. You deserve to be unshakable. The choice is yours. Will you continue to signal to the world that you're safe to disregard, or will you begin to embody the quiet, unshakable strength